Good evening. This is the July 14th, 2021 public hearing of the Plan Commission. The zoning ordinance directs this body to hear applications for map amendments, text amendments, plan developments, as well as to make recommendations regarding the city's long-term plans. This commission will make a recommendation which will be sent to the City Council. The first order of business is determination of a quorum. So, Ms. Jones?
Commissioner Draper? Here. Commissioner Halleck? Here. Commissioner Hugo?
Here.
Commissioner Johnson?
Here.
Commissioner Rogers?
Here.
Commissioner Westerberg?
Here.
And Chair Linwall.
Here.
Right, we have a quorum.
Okay, and I think, did you have something to add now or about kind of housekeeping things? This is the first hybrid meeting that we've had of this commission in quite some time, so.
Or really ever.
We're all trying to feel our way.
Yeah, so first, I probably don't need to tell you, if you're here, please silence your cell phones so that we don't have those going off. For any members of the public that are participating remotely, if you have no intention of making a comment or asking a question, we ask that you watch the streaming on the city's YouTube channel or on channel 16. And actually, that's, I think, the main housekeeping item. I think.
Okay, and then it's, the meeting is being recorded, so on the Zoom channel, so any side conversations in the room will get picked up. So please try to kind of focus on the conversation at hand.
Commissioner Lidwell,
Yes.
I'll direct everyone's attention to this little black microphone up there. That is the microphone that is feeding into the Zoom meeting. So it's not our microphones that are feeding into that, it is that microphone. So any amplification from this or from your voice, if you're near that or even far away, will be picked up into the meeting. So if somebody says something like, "Pass me the water," that gets picked up even if it's not on your microphone.
Okay, thank you. Next on the agenda, we need a motion among the commissioners to suspend the rules to allow to conduct the meeting in a hybrid fashion, both in person and Zoom.
I move that we suspend the rules in order to conduct our meeting in the hybrid fashion as described by the city, which allows for commissioners to be present and for members of the public to participate either in person or remotely.
I second.
All right. Commissioner Draper?
Yes.
Commissioner Halleck?
Yes.
Commissioner Hugo?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Commissioner Rogers?
Yes.
Commissioner Westerberg?
Yes.
And Chair Linwall.
Yes. Okay. Next on the agenda, we need to have a motion to review and approve the minutes from the May 12th and June 9th meetings. We need to take those one at a time. So
That would be best.
So may I have a motion for the May 12th, 2021 minutes?
I second.
Okay. Any comments or changes? Okay. I think you can take the roll.
Commissioner Draper? Yes. Commissioner Halleck? Yes. Commissioner Hugo?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Commissioner Rogers?
Yes.
Commissioner Westerberg?
Yes.
And Chair Linwall.
Yes. And next for the June 9th, 2021 minutes.
I move to approve the June 9th, 2021 meeting.
Okay,
I second.
all right. Thank you.
Are there no
Oh, any corrections or
edits or comments?
No.
All right. Commissioner Draper? Yes. Commissioner Halleck? Commissioner Hugo?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson? Commissioner Rogers?
Yes.
Commissioner Westerberg,
Yes.
Chair Linwall.
Yes. Okay, we have two public hearings that we'll consider this evening. If you did not sign up to speak before the meeting, there's a physical sign-up sheet in the council chambers. And there'll also be, with Zoom, you can raise your hand in the Zoom function as well when we get to the item. So the public hearings will both be handled in the same way. So here's kind of the basic format for today's public hearing. You know, the purpose of the Plan Commission and the public hearing is to gather facts and information regarding a petition, provide that information with a motion to recommend approval, approval with refinements, or denial to the City Council, where final action will occur. I'd now like to summarize the procedures we'll follow for tonight's public hearings. First, city staff will present a brief summary regarding the petition, followed by the petitioner, which we will have in the first item before us, after which the Plan Commission may ask questions of the staff or the petitioner. Next, members of the public can ask questions of the petitioner and give sworn testimony. When speaking, you should give your name and address. The petitioner will then have the opportunity to answer any questions from the public or to cross-examine any member of the public that provided testimony. After the public has completed its questions and testimony, that portion of the hearing will be closed. However, any member of the Plan Commission and city staff may question any member of the public who has spoken regarding their testimony. And finally, there's a summary closing by the petitioner and staff. After that, the Plan Commission will deliberate based on the evidence. And then there'll be clarifying or summary comments by each commissioner who chooses to do so. And then finally, there'll be a motion to recommend either approval with refinements, or denial. The first case on the agenda is case number 21 PLND-0049. It's a text amendment regarding live-work units. Andrew Spatz, applicant, submits for a text amendment to allow live-work units as a permitted use in the C2 Commercial District, which is Section 6-10-2 of the Evanston City Code. The City of Evanston also proposes text amendments to Title VI of the Evanston City Code to revise the definition of work-live unit, to add special regulations for live-work units, and to add live-work units as a permitted use within all non-residential and non-university zoning districts. So with that opening, I will turn it over to the applicant, I believe, first. Or are we going to do staff first? Oh, that's right, staff first.
Good evening, Plan Commission and members of the public. I'm Katie Ashbaugh. I am the newest planner to the Community Development Department. Thank you for the introduction to the case tonight. So as mentioned, this is a co-application with Andrew Spatz and the City of Evanston. And I'm going to break down the differences between what Mr. Spatz is proposing and then what the City of Evanston is also proposing this evening. So specifically, Mr. Spatz has requested to add live-work units to the list of permitted uses in the C2 Commercial District. And in conjunction with that, the City of Evanston would like to further add live-work units as a permitted uses within non-residential and non-university districts within the city, refine the definition of live-work unit in Section 6-18-3 of the zoning code, and then finally add some additional regulations pertaining to live-work units in Chapter 6-4. So Mr. Spatz will be doing his presentation following mine, but I'll just briefly highlight what he'll be discussing. So he initially proposed adding live-work units as permitted use to the C2 Commercial District only. I've attempted to kind of highlight those properties which are in the C2 district in black outline on the map on the screen. And specifically, his application was speaking to the property located at 1310 Hartree. It's just north of the intersection of Dempster and Hartree Avenue on the west side of Hartree. So the additional amendments that the city specifically is proposing are changes to the current definition of live-work unit. This is the current definition of live-work unit, and again, section 6-18-3 definitions. So we do currently define them. It's generally pretty broad. It just states that any commercial or manufacturing activity, someone can live within the space in which they're also conducting that activity if they have a valid business license, and it also must be the actual business owner. There aren't any other regulations regarding where in the structure the living area needs to be, where the entrances to that living area need to be, or how much of the floor area the living space can take up within the unit itself. So to attempt to take out a little bit of the regulations that are in that, specifically being who lives in a live-work unit, we've eliminated that, and that will be discussed later in my presentation. But the definition has been changed to specify that it's just a structure or a tenant space where a non-residential activity occurs, and that is non-residential activity is the principal use, and then the living quarters or dwelling unit is then accessory to that non-residential business activity. And specifically, the living area cannot just be where someone sleeps and or they have their own bathroom. It needs to be a full dwelling unit with a bed, kitchen, and then have a bathroom area and living space. So someone just putting a cot in the back of their business, that's not considered a live-work unit. So this is the proposed language with the clean definition. So taking out some of those qualifying items, and those will be discussed later. The second part of what the city's proposing is to allow live-work units in non-residential and non-university zoning districts as a permitted use. So that means that the use live-work units would be added to the business districts, the commercial districts, the downtown districts, the industrial districts, the transitional manufacturing employment district, the mixed-use employment district, and then lastly, office and open space. We did receive a question from a member of the Plan Commission regarding whether or not open space should be one of the districts it's added to. If that's something that with the way that we noticed it, we wanted to keep it broad for the public notice. But if the Plan Commission would like to remove that or suggest a modifying language to that, you can certainly do that on the floor this evening. So that means that the live-work unit would not be added to the list of permitted uses to the residential districts or any of the university campus districts. So they're already not listed. We are not going to add them to the districts as shown on the screen. The last part of the amendment that the city's proposing would, we're proposing to add more specific regulations. So again, currently the only time that we're really mentioning live-work units is in the definition section of the zoning code. It just says that the business owner must live there. They must have a valid business license. And generally, there are many live-work units that we're aware of that exist anecdotally in the city. So they've been allowed as a policy because the living portion has been considered accessory use. So what I'll be sharing next is what we'd like to propose to kind of put some regulations on them, but not be overly restrictive or to unnecessarily make anything non-conforming. So a new section 6-4-13 within the general provisions chapter. This will specifically regulate how large the living area can be within the live workspace, where it's required to be, where entrances can be to the living area of the structure or tenant space, who may live there, and then lastly, parking. So again, it does, the regulation that's in the definition currently, it would still be one live work unit per business with a valid business registration. We're specifically saying that the residential area where someone's living cannot be more than half of the overall business space. We are adding a minimum so that it's the residential area needs to be large enough to have an actual dwelling unit. That way we can also tie back to the tenant and landlord regulations and the rental registration regulations to protect any possible tenants of that space, and also, of course, the landlords. We are not requiring any additional parking for what's already required for the non-residential use at that location. Something that was found in the other communities that we did reference when we were drafting this, they do specifically state that the business activity must be visible from the street. So we've added that to the proposed language. It needs to be on the ground floor, or if it's a one floor business, it needs to be at the front of part of the tenant space or building. We also requiring that if you're going to have an entrance to that living area at the front of the business, you need to have the business entrance there too. You can't have the residential entrance like in lieu of the customer entrance. And then finally, if the residential area is larger than 1,000 square feet, then 2 dedicated entrances at a minimum are needed for the residential area on its own. So they would not need to exit through the commercial space. They would need to be, in event of an emergency, need to be able to exit out of the living area from 2 separate entrances. So that concludes my presentation. Mr. Spatz should be here to begin his presentation, and I can go ahead and stop sharing and go to his photos. Did anyone have any questions before I start sharing Mr. Spatz's presentation?
I have just a couple quick questions for you.
Sure.
So what was the discussion on the open districts? I got a little confused there as to what that was.
So the reason that was included in the amendment was simply to attempt to be broad from a staff perspective. But if the Plan Commission feels it's unnecessary to add it as a permitted use in the open space district, you can amend the language that was in the packet to reflect that. Okay.
And so unlike a B district in which residential is not permitted on a first floor, this would allow that to happen, but it doesn't sound like we're making any real restrictions on where it's situated in the property. Is that correct?
Not quite. The living area would still need to be at the back of the unit.
Okay. All right, that's all I need. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay.
I'll go ahead and share Mr. Spatz's presentation. Just a moment. Mr. Spatz available to speak?
Yes, I am.
Okay,
Sorry. Okay,
great.
well,
If you want to just let me know when you need me to.
yeah, I'll
slip-
just say next slide. How's that? So anyhow, my name is Andy Spatz, and I've been an Evanston resident for 35 years. I lived at 1220 Main, and now I live at 1216 Main. I've been developing real estate exclusively in Evanston with my company, Addis Spatz Properties, for the past 27 years. The mission of our work is to provide architecturally sophisticated, value-driven space to the Evanston marketplace. As a small-scale, vertically integrated company, we handle all in-house services for development, architecture, contracting, and marketing of our projects. We also serve as our own construction lender on a majority of our projects. Matt Berry, my architecture partner, and Elaine Cologne, property and office manager, round out the company. They are both also longtime Evanston residents. Per my previous discussions with Johanna and Melissa, Johanna Neidem and Melissa Klotz, and the support of Alderman Braithwaite, I would like to add live-work units as a permitted use in the C2 zoning district. I believe adding flexibility to the Evanston C2 commercial district will increase the city's property and sales tax income by decreasing vacancies in existing properties. It will also stimulate new developments such as my project at 1310 Hartray. Expanding property owner and end user choices will accelerate Evanston's recovery from the COVID economic recession. My company has 27 years of successful project history, adding to the demand for live-work units. This need is growing and justifies expansion to C2 district and will add to Evanston's demand for affordable building stock. As Evanstonians, we have a limited window of opportunity to inform the public and potential investors that the City of Evanston is an enabler that seeks to attract entrepreneurs and small business to our city. As we all know, we have location, a diverse community of talent, public transportation, and Northwestern University. Historically, similar legislation developed in public-private partnership has facilitated positive and lasting growth. For example, the creation of the now 15-year-old MXE zoning district and the related adaptive reuse portion of the Green Building Ordinance provided a development catalyst for both the 2nd and 5th wards. In those 2 wards, we have several live-work properties located. One is at the Stamp Factory, 2121 Dewey, 930 Pittner, and 940 Pittner. We would like to do more of these, and we think it'll be a lot easier if we can get the text amendment that we're so proposing. So, Katie, this is a site map. The blue-gray X next to the C2 by Dempster Street is where 1310 Hartray is, which is a 3-unit project. There's sort of like all like a townhouse kind of spaces that are all stacked up one behind the other as opposed to side by side. Next slide, please. This is the property at 1310, and on the left side of the project, the site, I should say, under the blue mansard roof is the famous Dempster Street Car Wash. Next slide, please. And this is what the property looked like last winter. There's a 2-unit building directly to the north, and the rest of the properties going down the street are single families. Next slide, please. This is looking over by U-Haul across the street on the east side. There's a view of the car wash looking north down Hartree. Next slide. There we go. Another slide of that property. Next slide, please. And we're looking directly north down Hartree. On the right side, the other side of the telephone poles is the U-Haul facility, and the property at 1310 is on the left. Next slide, please. More of the same. Next slide, please. This gives you an idea of the housing across the street from the U-Haul facility. Next slide, please. And there's the U-Haul space, which was an adaptive reuse project, and some of their vehicles. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. We're back into summer. Just some more of the lot. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. This is a site plan showing you the 3 units I described before. And the parking is in the back. There's 5 spaces, 1 handicap, and 4 spaces, 1 handicap, and 3 additional spaces. The AC units, which are the little rectangles on the roof, are on the roof, obviously. And the green space is the green space. Next slide, please. Here's the three units in question. The front and the rear are the same. They're just flip-flops. And then the middle one is a little bit smaller, which is about 1,300-ish square feet. And the 2 in the front are about about 1,550 square feet. Next slide, please. Oh, never mind. This is the second level, and the front and the back units have 2 enclosed spaces that can be used for offices or conference room or whatever, private spaces. And the middle space just has an open loft. Next slide, please. This is a picture of the model. You're standing in Hartree and you're looking west-northwest. The windows are what the darker sections are. The exterior skin is a combination of synthetic stucco and standing seam metal. Next slide, please. So this is the way you enter. There's 15 feet in from the lot line to the project, and then another 5-foot side yard. So the two buildings are about 20 feet apart, and so there's a lot of air there. And this space on our property is, we perceive it being used as outside space for the individual units. And everything's well lit, as you can see by the lights on the arms. And there's some plantings in there also. Next slide, please. This is from the parking area looking towards Hartree. And to give you an idea how big things are, this is my version of the person. Next slide, please. This is looking from the parking area to the rear unit, and there's these bay windows on the side that you see from the car wash. We actually paid a lot of attention on what people will see driving by on Dempster. It's just not some blank nothing. It's will be quite attractive, at least in the model it appears that way. And you can see the difference between the where the standing seam metal is on the sloped roof section, and the open holes are windows. Next slide, please. This is a similar project we just completed over at 2122 Hartray that gives you an idea of how the exterior skin works together. Next slide, please. Interior space, there'll be similar stairs and similar kitchens. And the floor is a food service grade 2-part water-based epoxy finish, and it's about 30 mils thick, so it should last forever, and you maintain it like you would a hardwood floor. Next slide, please. And that's upstairs, looking down through the stairway and using a commercial grade vinyl plank floor. And those little angle things are that braces the roof system. They're like they serve the same purpose as a cowl or tie would. And that's the front unit. Next slide, please. And that's a bird's eye view of the project, and that's all, folks. Anybody have any questions?
Yes.
Could you go back to maybe I misunderstood something. Could you go back to the plans, like the ground floor plan?
Yeah, Katie, you got to go back to maybe number 5, I think.
I apologize, I read the staff's report before coming to this meeting, but I didn't, this is the first time I've seen.
Whoops. Went past it. Floor plans. Sorry. One more. That's the second level. There you go.
Right. So this shows. So I'm trying to understand is it says office, but when I look at the plan, it looks like a living room. And then the second floor, for the second floor plan, that says office also. I had a concept in my mind of these live work units and there were the businesses in front and then the living quarters.
I hear what you're saying. We've been doing this for 27 years, and this is the way we do it. So we precede what was just presented, as does this project. So let me finish. So anyhow, what I'm saying is that we found that this kind of environment, the staff of any office user or artist type, they're going to be spending more time in here because it has a homey feel about it. Yes, could you interpret what you saw there correctly? Yes, you did, but it can be anything. It's just how you use it. You know, no, I know.
Just a concept, every works it works. What I'm a little confused at is how this relates to what the staff has described as a
The
are we reviewing both separate, are we separate things?
You'll have to ask Johanna. I don't know.
Recommendations separately? How do those two things mesh?
We've presented as a joint application for a text amendment here. So what's in the memo is what we're asking the commission to consider.
Do you think that this concept complies with the proposal as written?
It's my understanding that these particular images we've just received as we're preparing for this meeting, so I don't want to opine on that until we've had a little more chance to look at it. But I think that Mr. Spatz has been doing this concept in Evanston for quite a long time, so I think we're in the spirit of moving the live-work concept forward. I would anticipate that what he's going to provide here on Hartree is similar to what has been present in the rest of the marketplace.
My question is, if you went back, after you study this, if you went back to your recommendation, the language and the rules and all that, does it allow for this? Because to me, when I read it, again, I only read the staff portion, and I'm looking at this, and it just seems like a totally different animal. Not that it doesn't work. I'm not arguing that. I'm just saying it seems inconsistent with the definition.
Can I interject something? The way, the memo from the city is, it's headlined as draft. So it's a work in progress as I perceived it.
Except that I think that it is important that we are clear that, for example, is the living space less than 50% of the work-live unit in this particular case? Because that's, the language is, places that as a limit in the proposed staff language. So I think that's the question. For example, that's kind of the question.
So here's my off-the-cuff response. During COVID, let's say you took one of your bedrooms and you used it for your office so that you could shut the door and not hear any noise going on, somebody watching TV or whatever. But then you walk out into the living room and use the living room table for something. It's kinetic. It changes. We're not, the whole idea of what I was proposing was we need to give people what they're, what they're asking for. I get calls for live workspace 2-3 times a day. I don't have enough product to service the Evanston community. I wish I had. My accountants, Bialystok and Bloom, told me that if I had twice as many units, I could rent twice as many units. So I don't think we should be even considering dictating how people use these spaces. The idea is, my personal idea is that people come to Evanston because we have this product, let them do what they want to do, and let them spend their money here, and let them keep spaces rented, let landlords make money, let them fill up their second floor vacant spaces so that, the city gets the revenue that it needs. Mine was more of a business perspective because, my eyes are open. I can see what's happening, and this is my vision of what I think the city needs to move forward successfully. This is a big opportunity right now. We're in a downturn. The faster we come out of it, and the faster we give people the product that they're asking for, I think the better off we'll be. But one man's opinion.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions for Mr. Spatz? Yes.
I think it would still come back to the question that Commissioner Halleck raised, is if these amendments were to be adopted, would they permit this concept, however good it is, to go forward, right? I mean, that's the threshold question here. And if it doesn't allow this to go forward, then this is an academic exercise as to what, well, it's not, but I guess that's the issue here, right? Is will this not be permitted if we were to adopt? I think the concept's great. But you want me.
If we are okay with this concept, then the staff needs to go back and revise the proposal to accommodate this. That's all.
Like I said, the way I looked at the city's proposal for how they want to amend the permitted uses is that it's a work in progress. It's a draft. You know, it has to get polished. I mean, I don't know about you all, but I don't ever get anything right the first time. So, you know what I'm saying? I think that's part of why we're here. We're, discussing this.
Okay. All right, Commissioner Draper.
So just so we understand, what you're kind of saying is that you have to stay on the work unit, but you're going to take away some of the regulations that are, that MS's currently putting forward, like less than 50%.
I don't, something, I saw that stuff for the first time yesterday, and I really haven't gotten into it. What I do know is that there was a lot of hard work put into it, and I think if the amount of energy continues in that direction, it's going to be one, really good thing for the city. We've been doing this for 27 years. The second ward, the fifth ward in particular, you wouldn't have that brew pub coming in there if John Lineweber and his wife Muffy and me and this guy that owns his body shop didn't get the drug dealers off those streets and put in these units so that people had a reason to come there. So y'all can write whatever you want. All I'm saying is we got a good thing going. Let's just keep it going and grow what's there, because there's demand.
Do you have any personal, since it sounds like you got a lot of working experience with this, will you?
Commissioner Draper, turn your mic on.
It's the, on the,
Sorry. Sounds like you have a good working experience with live work units. Do you see any risks of people just living in these and not working? Of like them just turning into residential if we don't add some regulations about who works there or those sorts of things?
From my experience, it hasn't been a problem. I've been doing this, like I said, for 27 years. So.
Okay.
I think my only question for the city is just if this project is not yet approved to go under the new C2 designation, you're almost approving it while it doesn't meet the new regulations. So I think that's just the confusion. And the new regulations seem to be based on a number of good reference points from other cities or other communities, so I assume that you'd want to keep those. So I think it's just which aspect of this should we be approving at this time or reviewing at a later date would be my question.
The commission is looking at the text amendment, just the text amendment. So this would be a possible example of what could be done, but what the commission is looking at this evening is the text amendment that's within the staff report.
Great, thanks for the clarification.
I didn't understand that. They're looking at what I'm presenting or what is being, the city's presenting?
Yeah, well, they're looking at both.
Oh, okay.
And since there's a particular property that's associated with the text amendment, then we can take a look at it. But what will actually be voted on is the text amendment itself.
The whole thing?
yes,
Right.
the draft language is what we're supposed to be voting on, and
May I
that
ask a-
raises the question about whether or not a project like yours would be consistent with the proposed text amendment.
Right. And if,
I did make an application, right?
yes.
Okay, okay.
So your application, as I understand it, is to allow live work in the C2 zoning district. So that's one.
Live work, the definition of live work is what is now, not what may or may not happen in the future. That's what I went by. And the definition of live work is very, very, very loose. If you look at MUMXE Cliff Notes list that you get off the city website. So anyhow, right now, the only things that I see that have anything to do with live work is permitted on page 2, permitted in special uses. You have artist studio. You have dwelling, single-family attached or detached, two-family, multifamily. That's also a P in an MXE. And office. So that's the kind of user that I have in my spaces. Some users are Amazon kind of companies where they ship out a lot of stuff. Some users are attorneys. In my situation, there's very little of, I would say out of the 80 some odd units we have, maybe 10, 20% are doing double duty. The rest of it is either or, the way it is now. So if that helps you.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Mr. Spatz?
I have a question.
Yes.
That site plan, as I understand it, the street is on the short side of the building?
No.
Am I wrong?
There you go.
Yes.
Front is on the right.
Yeah, on the, well, that's what I meant, on the right.
Okay.
Okay, because one of the, I thought, fundamental, and this is why I brought up the confusion, one of the fundamental concepts in the staff suggestion, I know that's not what you were following, I get it, is that the non-residential activity or tenant space shall be visible from the public right-of-way. To me, that's a fundamental concept, and this isn't. So I guess I really don't understand what we're doing.
If I can interject, when you go before DAPR and you present a project, DAPR makes suggestions, and the applicant, they, respond to those questions, and the project gets modified accordingly or not. It's not binding. So, as a design professional, somebody telling me, if you could go, can you go to one of the model slides, please, Katie? Yeah, just hold your horses there. Okay, so you're walking down the sidewalk. You're not frozen in time like the scale figure. The thing changes. So, what's the front, what's the back, what's the side, what faces the street? I most certainly do not know. And, what I know is that this is, it's like putting a square peg in a round hole. So.
Understand. I'm not criticizing your concept.
Sorry, Mr. Halleck. I'm just pointing out the
inconsistencies, that's all.
I'm probably reacting the wrong way, so I apologize. But,
Okay. I have questions of staff. I wonder if others, commissioners, have questions they'd like to direct to staff? I don't. Mr. Rogers, why don't you go first?
My question to staff is, we've seen a move recently by city council over the past couple of years to sort of move away from our C districts. Is there any concern that we are creating something that will be a non-conforming use fairly easily? Because I'm guessing that most of those C districts would convert to B districts. And so should we be treating B and C districts fairly similarly at this point, based on the fact that we know there is a move, or has been a move on council? I can't speak to the new council, but in previous councils, some of those members are still there, who have had a distaste for the commercial districts being in neighborhoods.
don't know if Katie wants
Katie.
to add a little bit extra after, but I am aware of past possible referrals to consider doing away with, I think specifically the C1A. And I think that's part of the reason why staff tried to be more broad with where these would be allowed, is to have some of that flexibility should some of these districts be combined or taken away or changed into something else. So to the extent possible, we would try to make sure that we wouldn't be creating something that's not conforming in that way.
And to add to that, thank you, Megan. The primary non-residential activity that would be in these live work units would be something already permitted by right or with a duly authorized special use within that state on that property as it is. So they would not be able to become a live work unit per se if they did not already have that allowed non-residential activity in that district. So the non-conformity, the potential for non-conformity, that would coincide with, to Megan's point, the districts and how those are combined or realigned in the future. I don't know that the live work unit would add to that or not, particularly because the intent is to add them to all of the non-residential districts and except and not in the university districts or the residential districts. Does that answer your question?
I think so.
Okay.
Commissioner Hugo, I think.
Just I don't know if it's appropriate or not at this point, but on the text amendment itself, the requirement that there not be additional parking for the dwelling unit, what was the thinking behind that?
So the idea that they would not require additional parking is that the business owner is already residing on the property, and whatever parking would be required, the parking that already would be required for that non-residential activity, that the business owner's parking would be absorbed into that. So that's one less car that's already going to that property because it's there currently. So we don't need an additional parking spot for that person.
Okay. Other questions?
I think my question, following up on the parking, is just if you allow this in the downtown districts and the transitional downtown, I think that parking issue could become a little difficult, given that parking can be limited, especially in the transitional zones, if there's more than someone, just the business owner living there. So I guess that would be my question as to whether you feel that parking regulation may need to be expanded a bit for certain areas.
I have also a question for staff. I'd like to get some clarification on the reason under the ownership and occupancy, why there's a provision for an employee of the business owner or one or more employees of the business owner to live in the work-live, as opposed to what I think most of us traditionally think of a work-live situation where the owner-occupant is is the person living there and working there, and not employees. So.
Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting.
That's all right.
So the thought behind adding an employee of the business in addition to solely the business owner would be if it were a small business. Because the idea is that it would be a non-residential activity already allowed by right. If that business owner did have an employee perhaps assisting with something, maybe perhaps they're learning a trade, apprenticeship, that if the business owner does live elsewhere, they could possibly lease out that living space to an employee. And again, the parking would still be accounted for as the non-residential activity. And as noted in the staff report as well, by someone living there and working there, that does cut down on a vehicular trip. There may be someone storing their car there, but they're not necessarily a customer coming and going. It's a car that's taken care of and absorbed in the non-residential parking requirement. So that was the thinking behind that. But understanding that is a little bit of a difference from the existing definition.
Okay, because when I read that, I'm thinking, I mean, it just harkened back to the old, sweatshop situation where you have, business and he's got an employee dormitory. And, if there's not a cap on how many employees could live in a space, I mean, under our property standards or, the building codes, in 1,000 square foot residential area as part of a live work, you could probably have a number of potential employees which could cause a problem. I just think that, I understand what you're trying to accomplish, but I think that in going to a live-work definition in the standards, we're probably best off, at least initially, to limit it to owner or the business owner in the space. So that was kind of one of my concerns. And then, yes.
I think one of our, as Katie sort of mentioned, one of our thoughts was, what if the business owner, how do we define a business owner versus maybe the person who's operating the business in the space? We have a couple architects in the room. What if the owner of the firm doesn't actually use the space as much? Maybe they live out of state, maybe they live somewhere else, but they own the business, but they have an architect who is meeting clients, maybe doing the principal amount of work. That is a use that is perfectly appropriate for this, and maybe that person then could live there, but they're not the owner of the business. So I think we were trying to think creatively about how a relationship of a business and letting others managing, senior managers or other people, principals of a small firm, might be the people who live there. I think that was where we weren't trying to think of like what you're describing. We were trying to think of more of a, how do we then, we hear that somebody who doesn't own the business, well, they own the business, sort of, they're going to get the business in 2 years, retirement. I mean, like, instead of getting caught up in the relationship of the business owners and the employees, indicating that there could be other people that work there that are also living there.
Yeah. And I can see, some sort of, artisan training sort of operation where you have your trainees living in a space might be a desirable use, but I don't think the regulations as they're laid out really provide any safeguards at all to ensure that that sort of thing doesn't turn into, the old stereotype of the exploitive business owner with his employees living in the back, which, clearly is not what you're suggesting.
Correct. We absolutely were thinking and trying to prevent exactly what you're describing when we were developing these. I completely understand if there's some hesitancy of the commission members, but one thing that we did want to include, which was why we, under the permitted residence portion, we did want to cite that if the business owner does end up leasing to their employee, then they do need to comply with our landlord and tenant regulations, and then also register it as a rental property. And then also the occupancy standards would be like they would be regulated how they are elsewhere in the code, to make sure that you're not having that exact type of situation. And that's also why we have that minimum. We added the minimum requirement for the size of the dwelling unit to, as you said, avoid where someone's just throwing a cot up and leasing it to someone and say, or paying, we're trying to avoid those situations. But that's exactly an excellent point.
Okay. And then my other question really is, we've dealt with the open space district question, which was one of the ones I had, because the mapped open space districts are all public parks, so it seems a little odd to be allowing a live-work in a public park. The other question I have in looking through the districts, the one that I find a bit problematic would be the I-3 zoning district, which is allows heavy manufacturing, ready-mix plants, and things of that nature. So I would think that we may want to consider excluding that from the list of areas that are where uses are permitted, just because of the intensity of the otherwise allowed uses within that district. So I don't know if you'd looked at, I understand having the notice broadly speaking, so you're encompassing all potential non-residential districts. And I guess, I think that concludes my questions. Commissioner Draper.
I didn't see it in the text, but maybe I'm missing it, but has there been discussion about having somewhere in this amendment about limiting it to like one household? This would kind of alleviate this thing of multiple employees staying there, I know that household question is in our next text amendment, so I'll just say household. But I mean, some of these could potentially be big, where it's like a whole top story, it's like a unit where you could have a family in it. Does it make sense to put that language in there?
I think you're all raising very good questions about this, and I think one observation I would make about just housing and use of housing and how we are living, we're in a very interesting moment in our human history of how are we existing in indoor spaces and in all realms, and I think we're coming up with different ways in which people could be residing in residential spaces, and so I don't know that staff knows all the answers to these questions. I mean, I think what I've observed in a lot of these discussions, not just tonight, is we all know of a situation where something went really bad, and we all know of a situation where something went really well when the rules are outside of what we're used to having. So we all know a situation where live work works really nicely, but we also can come up with a situation where live work could go horribly wrong. You could pack a bunch of people in to a space and they're doing something during the day and then they're sleeping on cots at night. I mean, we can all come up with those situations. Maybe we even know them to be true, but those are things that I think we would look to the commission to give guidance or thoughtfulness on, that we can then, as it moves to Planning and Development Committee, the City Council, think about those things, because we can only consider the what if. I think from staff's perspective, we would like to define this use. This is a use that we are seeing increasing. There's a plan development that will be before you next month likely that has live work spaces. So we would like to see this defined in the code, and we would also like to start inspecting them. Currently, property maintenance inspectors do not inspect these units. There are people living in them. They're not inspected by city staff as other rental properties. So that is something that needs to change, and we would like to change that, and having some standards that are in the zoning code that can be enforced, but also how that would then tie into our property maintenance code is very important. So we're trying to think about all these things, but also this is a great conversation to think about how the bigger households are used, individuals, all these things, family, all those things, how they align even in this item that isn't related to the next item, but sort of is.
Okay. We have more questions for staff? Mr. Hugo.
Just one follow-up on Commissioner Linwell's earlier comment about sweatshop issue. You're right that as currently drafted, if the non-owner employee is leasing or renting, then you've got some checks with the subject to the landlord-tenant regulations, et cetera. But what if the employee is just given the space as part of their work package, not leasing it, just made available to the employee? What would then be the safeguard there to avoid 5 employees being given, not leasing it, they're just being given the use of as part of their, let's say, compensation package?
I would defer some of that maybe to Mr. Spatz to answer. I mean, if in your experience, do you find that people lease the space and then somebody else is living there? Or, I think there's also a checks and balances to some extent with a landlord. They want to know who's in their property and who's leasing. So I think that's, Andy, if you want to maybe opine, but come to
Tommy, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So anyhow, I got a question for you guys. If you had a space, and let's say you had a couple people working with you, would you want all these hypotheticals going on and you living there at the same time? I know I wouldn't. I know that being a good landlord and knowing what's happening in my spaces, I've never seen anything like that. Most of the time, and I'll just run down, I'm just going to do it in my head through units that I have going on right now. I have a guy that has an insurance company. He has 2 staff members come in. They leave at 5, 6 o'clock. He lives there. He has exercise equipment set up. He works out there. There's maybe at the maximum 3 or 4 people in a 3,200 square foot space. I know a smaller space, a 1,700 square foot space. Guy has an Amazon company, and he picks it, he ships it, and he has a assistant come in, and the assistant leaves. It's just somebody coming, a pair of helping hands coming in. The units are designed so that they can be segregated from, upstairs living and sleeping, and downstairs your workspace. And sometimes they commingle. So people have common sense. They're not going to, if they're spending a couple of $2,000-3,000 a month, they're not going to want to spend the lion's share of their life in an uncomfortable situation. So what I'm saying is that the whole, when I put this together, the whole idea is to add some flexibility to the city's building products. That's all. That's all I'm trying to do here, so that we don't have to have conversations about, policing a lot of things that really, me personally, I don't think need to be, we don't need to deal with. I mean, the conversation we're having about parking, to me, is, I don't quite understand it, because I see all these projects that have a half a car per unit, but then you're talking about 2 cars on some little bitty nothing project. It's like it's nuts. There's no consistency. And anyhow, live work is it's a positive product. My space in my own home is set up that way, and it's me living there and me working there. And I have another person that comes in and helps me, and my wife comes downstairs and she helps me, and that's the extent of it. I mean, those are the kind of things that I see happening in these spaces, and how they've worked in every darn space I've done. And I consider myself an expert, and I'm also probably the last man standing as far as a local Evanston developer who's been doing these kind of things. The rest of them are gone. And I just think that we have an opportunity here, and I know I'm going off track because I'm upset, that we have an opportunity here, and we have to grab it now. What's happened to people in my business, and I'm just giving you an idea, and I know I'm talking off point. First, we got hit with Fritz Kagi and his commercial tax increases. That was a body blow. Then we got COVID. That was not good for building things. And now we're dealing with a 400% increase in building materials. And so the push should be the other way. The push should be to help people get stuff done so that we don't end up with vacancies on second floors of downtown buildings not producing tax revenue that we desperately need. People are good at spending money. What I want to do is bring more in, because we're landlocked. And I know I'm spoke off point, but I hope I answered
Okay.
part of your question.
Thank you. Are there any more questions for staff or the applicant?
I've got a question. Could we, just procedurally, because I think that's what we're all
Yeah.
tangled about. Procedurally, could we approve the live-work units on Mr. Spatz's particular sites, not all C2, just particular sites, and then have the staff go back, reevaluate the proposed changes to language, text amendment, and then represent it to us for all the other zoning areas? I mean, I'm just suggesting that.
So what is under the commission's purview is the text amendment, just the text within the zoning code, so not
Oh, I see.
approving the plans that Mr.
We're
Spatz
not, okay.
presented this evening.
Okay. All right. Do we have, then, the next item would be, do we have any public comment? I don't think anyone had signed up. Okay.
The staff document is a good document.
Hello.
Yes. Oh,
Hi. Can I ask a question? I didn't sign up for this one. I signed up for the next one. But I just wanted to know, what is Evanston's policy about business owners? And are you supposed to have an office in Evanston if you have a business in Evanston?
we'll have to defer to staff on that one, I would imagine.
Hi, Tina. I think I'm not sure I understand the
Okay,
question.
so if I remember correctly, I'm going to just say for my business, landlord, that if you, that say there's very many absentee landlords. And from what I thought I remember, that you had to have an address in Illinois or Evanston to, run your business out of. So that was my question. So when we're talking about live workspace, is this to help be in compliance with that rule? So my question is that a rule that you have to have if you're an absentee, quote, landlord, or an absentee business owner, that you have to have an address in Evanston or Illinois?
This is Johanna. I'm not aware of that rule, and the glances I'm exchanging with my colleagues here would indicate they're not aware of that either. But how about we look into it a little bit and maybe have a second conversation with you and see if we can get an answer on that.
Okay, because I know there was a lot of absentee landlords, and that was, I thought that at some point, city council made that a rule that the landlord had to have an office address in the town, or at least in Illinois. Okay.
We'll look into it and have a follow-up conversation with you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Oh, I have another question too, for the developer here. So with the live work, so how, actually it's for staff, how are you proposing to make sure that they're in compliance, and do they have to pay rental registration like the landlords?
I can speak to that, Tina. The intent is that if the amendments are moved forward as they've been presented this evening, the person residing within the living area of the live work unit may be an employee of the business owner. And if that is the case, where the business owner, that is the business owner identified on the business license or registration that they're required to get with the city, if they are not going to live in the living area, they're going to lease it to an employee, then the city will then inspect that living area as a rental unit as it does with its other multifamily properties and other rental properties. Does that answer your question?
I guess I just didn't know if that had to be established in advance, or it's just happened so, or how is this? I'm asking the city too, how are you enforcing these policies?
Tina, this is Johanna again. Yes, we're going to work towards inspecting those just as we do with other properties if people are residing there. That is part of the effort tonight, is to create this category so we can better monitor where they are and inspect.
Okay, and how many units was this? I'm sorry, I missed that part.
3.
This is a text amendment tonight for the zoning code. The developer has shown us the property on Hartree where he is proposing to where the live work lofts would be, and there's 3 units there. However, that development is not for approval. It's just the text amendment tonight.
Okay, and is this project asking for any money, like grants or anything from the city?
There's no monies being asked for that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. Darlene Cannon here.
Yes.
I wanted to know, of the 3 units that that he's having, are any of them going to be affordable? At a time where the city says that we're looking at everything through a lens of equity, and there are lots of business owners who are low income, who provide services to our community, and that they might want to be in one of those lofts. And what is the option or the probability that that's going to be available, that at least one of those units will be affordable?
Darlene, this is Sarah Flax. Currently, we do not have an affordability for business space or live work space. That is something that
we don't have one for affordable housing either, but go ahead.
But if you look at the inclusionary housing ordinance, that covers only properties that have 5 or more units at the moment.
I mean, yeah, I'm sure that there's some sort of workaround. I know that we have these policies, but we don't seem to be able to implement those. But that's a conversation for another day. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Okay, at this point, I will close the public testimony and comment. Now I think.
Hello, excuse me, I'm so sorry. Is this only for the first
Yes.
item?
Yes,
Okay.
it is only for the
Excuse
first
me.
item. All right. So I think, does staff or the applicant have anything that they want to add at this point? Otherwise, we can proceed to Plan Commission deliberations. Okay. So, I would suggest, since you know, what we are focusing on is the text amendment language, what might be most efficient would be just to kind of go through section by section and identify issues that either language that could be removed from the proposed text amendment, modified, so that we kind of have clear direction and either vote on the text amendment as we choose to modify it, or if it is something that needs to go back to staff, we can do that. But that would be my suggestion. First of the section is, does anyone have any issues with the definition in section 6-18-3? Okay. Hearing none. What about section 646-13, which are the special regulations pertaining to the live-work units? This involves the purpose and intent, construction, the number of units, which basically says, one live-work per business. Issues? Yes.
Can I go back to my earlier point in point F? The ownership and occupancy. As drafted, it allows either the owner or somebody leasing from an owner or an employee to occupy that space. And if the employee is leasing, if someone is leasing, the employee presumably in this case, then the safeguard is the landlord-tenant regulations. Again, what is the protection or whatever for an employee who's not leasing?
Yeah. Let's take that. My suggestion for that particular section on the permitted residence, I would delete employee of the business owner. I would, at this point, if that could be something that, if it turns out that needs to be amended at a later date, you could revisit that, which if we take out the number one under permitted residence, if we just take out in the first paragraph, or an employee of the business owner and delete that, then I think that my issues with parking and some of the other concerns would go away. So that would be my suggestion for that. But I'd also like to go back to under the special regulations, under E, the dwelling unit size within a live-work unit. I would suggest we delete number one altogether with the maximum, because that really would address the kind of evolving nature of how the spaces are operating now. Because I think that it appears likely that Mr. Spatz, the kind of tenants and occupants that are in Mr. Spatz's development may use more than 49% of the space at any particular given time. So that would be another thing that I think that we may be best off to, in the interest of moving this item forward to the City Council and getting something on the books, because I think the definition and some of the other suggestions are good ones. But that's my thought. Other commissioners?
I don't have a problem with changing the restriction on the occupancy. I think that by removing the percentage of space that is designed for residential purposes is important, so you don't end up with this tiny little storefront. There used to be a business on Howard Street, and this was not a live work, but this was a sub-business, and they set up a little tiny corner where they did your taxes, and that was the business. And the rest of the store was the rest of the store. But I wouldn't want to see us get into a situation where we have created something where this little 10%, 20% cutout in a corner is approved. I personally work from home. I have a live-work environment, although it's not designed that way. I work out of my second bedroom, and sometimes I sit at the dining room table. But it's designed as a dining room to be that type of a space, or a living room, I sit at my couch. It's designed for that purpose. So there is a definite definition of space. It's how I use it that's different. So that's my only concern with removing that percentage amount, is that we don't want to end up with something that's just a tiny little box in, a larger space.
Commissioner Draper.
I would have to agree with that as well. I feel like some sort of regulation is important. If we're talking about expanding this into a lot of different zones that don't allow residential, there is this risk that it's going to be mostly residential and a little bit office, so, or not office, you know, for your mixed use. So I also see that it's useful to have some sort of percentage. I do see that not having anything really does allow for flexibility in the future. We do want to kind of promote flexibility. But I would probably promote having a percentage as well.
I would agree.
But should the percentage be 49% or 60% or, you know, should you limit it to you know, you've got to have a bedroom and a kitchen and, you know, the space. You have to have the kitchen, you have to have the bathroom for the residents, and you have to have presumably a bedroom. Maybe you require it by requiring a bedroom.
I mean, I think that you know, obviously anything could be, I'm guessing that a major variation would come into play here if somebody wanted to alter this, and that'd be able to be approved through ZBA. If somebody wanted to change that and make it a different type of a setup, because we're talking by right here, and so I think we should be somewhat restrictive in our by right and allow people to petition for the out of the ordinary instead of being very open and potentially creating issues that we may not anticipate. Let people come to us and ask the permission as opposed to us just granting kind of an open.
Okay. All right. Let's see, moving on. I think we've covered then yes, I'm sorry.
Just to go back to the opening paragraph, sorry, the comment I forgot. To add a bathroom, a live work unit shall not consist of solely the allowed non-residential activity in a sleeping unit without a kitchen and bathroom. Is that something that's needed there?
Except that.
Is that a question for staff or discussion amongst? Was that?
No,
were you asking what?
Is the reference to bathroom? Is we need to add bathroom into that sentence? Because you want both, right?
Our business is required to have bathrooms currently under code. I would assume they are. So I don't know that we need to duplicate that if it's already covered elsewhere in the code.
Is the intent to have a separate kitchen and bathroom for a living occupant as opposed to the business? Or is the intent to have a kitchen and bathroom simply be there for whatever use is going on at the time?
I mean, personally, I would prefer not to have clients use my bathroom. That's my personal bathroom. But I guess it sort of depends on what type of live-work environment it is.
Yeah, I think as it's drafted, the intent is to have some separation so you don't have customers that can be using the same bathroom as whoever is residing in the space.
But if it is going to end up being a pretty small unit, having 2 bathrooms is quite cumbersome.
Right.
I can see the text of adding a kitchen because you could have a small office with no kitchen. So that makes sense to add the kitchen component.
Yeah, I think I'm okay with the language as it's written because on that one. All right, so any other comments? I think we've covered the ownership and occupancy, off-street parking.
Again, I think my concern with off-street parking is just if you do have an employee as well as an owner, then you might have to be able to accommodate that.
Except that I think that commercial spaces typically require more than residential, so, because calculate the parking requirement based on the principal commercial use. Is that correct? Okay. Katie is nodding yes.
For the audio recording, I'll say yes, that is correct.
So and again, it says here, parking is required for the non-residential activity per Chapter 16. So I guess I'm just asking whether that would necessarily cover the residential occupant as well, should that be the case?
The residential occupants, if the dwelling unit component of the business was not part of their non-residential space and they were just coming to work, that would be part of that requirement as it is. So they're already it's absorbed into that requirement. It's the same vehicle. In fact, it could technically cut down because they're not coming and going. Their car stays there, and then they would, in theory, their customers may come and go, or they may have an employee come and go. But to your point, the non-residential activities, they do have typically higher requirements than residential. Typically, I think they range from 1.5 stalls to 2. Depending on the breakdown of units. So the intent is that car is already absorbed.
Okay, I mean, and I may not be being clear. If you have, sorry to belabor this, but if you have a commercial space which is allowed 1.5 parking spaces, and that's being used for the work activities, the non-residential activities, and then you do have a residential tenant who also needs a car. Do you need to add a parking space for that, is my question. And I'm only thinking of this in terms of some of the transitional zones where parking does become kind of limited on the street. If we are not allowing an employee of the business owner to live in a live-work unit, then that may not be a concern. I'm just trying to understand what the parameters are there.
I believe that most of the parking requirements that are minimum requirements, they are calculated and based upon not only the customers that hypothetically would be coming, but they're also intended to account for employees. For example, restaurants may require a number of stalls per seat that's provided, and then there's another part of the formula where they require a minimum number of stalls per square footage, so of the area. So, and to your point, that employee, although that may be removed now, if the employee is living there, their parking stall is already calculated in the parking requirement for the non-residential activity.
Okay, yes.
Sorry to also belabor this point. Going back to this bathroom thing, again, when reading the background analysis in the memo, the last sentence in that first paragraph says that if the area does not have a heating element in the kitchen sink or does not have a private bathroom not used by the customer during business hours, it would not be considered a live-work unit, which seems to imply that you need 2 bathrooms, one for the customers and another private one that's not used by the customers during business hours, which means you got to have 2 bathrooms. If that was the intent, that there be 2 bathrooms, and I do think we need to put the word bathroom in that section we talked about earlier. If the intent was that there only need to be 1 bathroom for customers and for the occupant, then I think we're okay.
Okay.
Can I say something, please? Every one of my units, except for, no. Sorry. Every one of my units, 1 bathroom. If you're trying, this is where the inconsistency I see that happens every day, is that if you're trying to make things affordable and you load it up,
Those two things don't happen. You can't do it. So this woman over here that was complaining, in her manner that she wants affordable this and affordable that, how are you going to give it to people if you're doing double duty? As far as the parking goes, there's plenty of parking regulations in the zoning code right now that takes care of everything you're talking about. If you have a medical space, you need two cars per 1,000 square feet of space. And it goes down the list on all this kind of stuff. You don't need to add anything. It's all there already. You could add, if you wanted to, you could just put in or greater in the right part of the sentence. Whatever which way you want to go. You either want to reduce it or you want to raise it. You just put in, the higher standard is what drives it. Anyhow.
Okay. All right, moving on to design H and I, which are the design standards and alterations. Any comments or concerns about those sections? Seeing none, I would like to entertain some discussion on section 6, with the section really allowing where live-work units should be allowed in which districts. So right now, I'm sorry, I didn't know there were questions. If you have questions on design standards?
Well,
or
this
discussion?
issue of shall be visible from the public right away.
Yes.
I know there's a perspective, I don't think that was the intent of this. I think the intent of this was that it be on the street, visible, like in the front facade, on the street facade. If we want to change, if we don't think that's important, then I think the language should be broadened a little bit. Or maybe you don't even say that the business should be visible.
Oh, so on entrances, you would just take out?
Yeah, well, number one is what I was talking about, and number two.
Oh, right. Yeah, just eliminate one.
Yeah.
Do we need?
Right. Two is okay, I think. Or well, no. It says may be located, so.
I may interject, Chair. The item 1 was added to ensure that it maintains the appearance of being a non-residential business, like it's an business activity, and that it doesn't become to be more residential in character. So it is more of a storefront, or there's an entrance to the business, or that the actual location of the non-residential activity is occurring on the ground floor, and then if it's a 2-story building, it's an owner-occupied building, then they're residing above. As you do in more traditional buildings in the downtown and areas and such. So if that clarifies, or maybe it could be revised to state that it's shall be the front portion closest to the street. I understand where you're coming from with the visible, because not all businesses necessarily have your commercial floor-to-ceiling windows, but just something, that was the intent of that.
Yeah, well, I think that the problem in this particular case with the site plan that Mr. Spatz had is that you really, only one of the units is along the frontage, the others are stacked kind of behind. So it's not on the street.
If I could make a suggestion, maybe rather than saying the non-residential shall be visible, say the residential shall not be visible from the street face. Because that way, in a situation like Mr. Spatz's, where the property sits lengthwise, as long as I don't see the residence dead center on that first floor right there in front facing Hartree, that I think presents the problem and changes the character to make it residential, not commercial.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
So just by saying that it can't be visible from, the residential cannot be visible from the street. On that first floor.
Okay.
I would agree with that as well. I think that's a good suggestion.
You guys are creating
It's exactly what we do for B districts
You're
and
making every property that is existing, you don't want to, what you're saying is you don't want to create nonconformity. That's what you're doing.
First off, I'd like to ask the chair that the record is closed at this point. Secondly, what I'm looking at is bringing this more into compliance with what we typically do in B districts, which are business districts, and our commercial and business districts should not have a residential character on the first floor. They should have a business character, or else we should just change everything to a residential district, and all bets are off. But I'm not for that. I'm trying to make our C districts and B districts be more compliant and compatible with one another by making them both feel like business districts at ground level.
All right. Moving on, are there any other changes on the design standards? Is 2 okay?
I just had one,
Yes.
I guess it was back on the last section, about is adding something about a household important or not? Because if we do take away that it's just the business owner that lives there, do we need to specify that their family lives there? Or is that not important?
I think if we, as long as we take out employee, I
Don't
don't think we need to
Okay.
confuse two different issues at this point. So that would be, all right. So what about I? Any issues with I? The alterations or additions to existing structures? Okay, hearing none. We get into the question of which non-residential districts should these be allowed in. I would like to suggest we remove the I-3 district for the reasons that I had stated previously in terms of the intensity of the kind of manufacturing allowed. I'd also like to suggest that we not allow it in the open space district. I'm torn about the downtown districts, whether or not live work is appropriate in the downtown, so I can defer to the consensus of the group. And then I guess we didn't really talk about the overlay districts that are listed. So, commissioners, thoughts?
My personal preference would be to remove the open space districts. That makes no sense to me, because those should not be developed in any way, shape, or form. I have no problem with the downtown districts. I have a bit more problem with all of the industrial districts, I-1, 2, and 3. Just because of the nature and the fact that you have trucks coming through that can be large and things like that, and just from a public safety issue between the types of businesses that are allowed in the industrial and the weight of traffic that can move through there and everything, I think that we can restrict those and not have a large impact on this. We don't have that many industrial districts left in the city anyway.
Okay, so any other comments, thoughts? Can we move to, I think what we need to do is make a motion to either accept this, leave a motion to accept the staff. We have a couple of choices. Either we can refer this back to staff to redraft, or we can make a motion to approve the staff text amendments and then go through and make amendments to that before it goes on to the city council. So those are our choices, I believe.
Before you proceed, I'd also like to note that it needs to, the special regulations that you just finished reviewing needs to be section 6-4-13, not 6-4-6-13. So if you're able to note that in your motion, that would be helpful as well.
What was the?
6-4-13. So it would
Oh,
follow.
no extra 6. Okay, got it.
Yes. Mhm.
Got it.
Thank you.
Okay, what is the preference of the commission?
I would suggest we have staff redraft it, if that's possible. I think it'd be easier to vote on quickly with changes.
Okay. Staff have sufficient direction? All right. So I guess then we will continue this item until, do we need to do a date certain for this? And when would, I believe our next,
So if you do a date certain, as is already on the calendar, we've got July 28th, we've got August 11th, and then August 25th are the next few meeting dates.
would this take long to redraft? Could we have it for the July 28th meeting? I don't believe we only have, one item on that agenda? Would that be possible?
We will have it ready for the July 28th meeting.
Okay.
So if that's the case, I would make a continuance of this particular matter until our July 28th meeting, so staff has an opportunity to take our comments and draft them into a new draft ordinance. Or text amendment, I'm sorry.
Right. Thank you. Is there we need a second on that?
I'll second.
Okay,
Wanna
I
call
will
the-
call the roll.
All right.
Okay, Commissioner Draper? Commissioner Halleck? Commissioner Hugo?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson? Commissioner Rogers?
Yes.
Commissioner Westerberg?
Yes.
Chair Linwall?
Yes.
Okay, that passes.
All right. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is text amendment occupancy of dwelling units. It's 20 PLND-0071. I think there is staff presentation at this point.
Yeah, brief one for this one. I will have that up. All right. Okay, so this is probably I believe the 6th meeting that's been before either Plan Commission or subcommittee of the commission. So at the June 9th meeting, staff proposed 2 different alternatives, and those are summarized here. The first was to remove the definition of family from the zoning code as it currently stands and change references to dwelling unit. The over occupancy would be based on property standards, square footage requirements, and that would apply for both owner-occupied and rental properties. And enforcement would require the hiring of an additional inspector to support the added inspections and enforcement of the processes, including calculations of occupancy based on the floor plan submitted. And the inspector would also support routine rental inspections as the number of rental units continues to increase. The second alternative was to change the number in the definition for single family from 3 to 8, and then make rooming houses available or permitted in all residential districts. And enforcement of that would also require an additional inspector to be hired. Some of the main discussion points from the last commission meeting were generally the purpose and benefits of retaining a family definition and occupancy standards. Chair Linwall had proposed a possible third alternative that would have kept the definition of family. There was continued discussion on how to enforce any proposed and existing regulations as it relates to nuisances. And then general consideration that the zoning code is not really the place to address occupancy standards or to control human behavior. So ultimately, the commission voted to have staff look further into alternative one, and at such a time when other concerns that were brought up can be addressed, return to the commission with proposed language for the text amendment. So, skip a little bit. So we do have some additional information this evening, just to outline what we're trying to do. Just as a reminder, we do have existing nuisance regulations within our city code. Those are within Title V, Title VIII, and Title IX. And there's some chapters that speak specifically to nuisances and define what those nuisances are. And as part of the conversation, we did want to address that there are a number of concurrent matters that are also being reviewed by staff and will be before council at a future date. The first listed here is the moratorium on non-owner occupied internal and attached accessory dwelling units. This would essentially create a provisional moratorium. I believe the discussion was between 3 and 6 months for non-owner occupied accessory dwelling units that are internal or attached. And this is actually, I believe the item that'll be before the commission at the next meeting. And there's also a consideration of a rental licensing program. And this would be basically a replacement for rental registration in order to strengthen some of the enforcement of our property standards and the occupancy limits. And this would essentially give the city a way to revoke a license should there be a number of violations. You also are looking at increasing fines and fees associated with violations of occupancy and rental violations, basically to make it more expensive to violate established codes within the city. And then some changes are proposed to the nuisance premises ordinance. And these would include strengthening enforcement on items such as noise, public drunkenness, excess garbage, parking violations, and things of that nature. So the proposed text amendment summary, this is really a summary. If we need to go, I can try to pull up the actual regulations if you want to go kind of deep dive. This summarizes what is proposed. So within definitions, we've got a number of definitions that we need to revise or remove. Of course, the first being removing the definition of family and definitions for single family, two-family, multifamily, and change those to single unit, two-unit, or multi-unit buildings. And as part of this, we would obviously need to go through the rest of the zoning code and adjust language so that where we have single family, we adjust that language. So that it's summarized shortly here, but it's definitely something that would take a good amount of effort to do. And we've already pretty much identified where those places would be. We would also look at additional definitions such as boarding houses, daycare homes, residential care homes, et cetera, and remove references to the family and update that with language such as dwelling unit. Also for section 614.114, which specifically relates to occupancy of dwelling units, we would remove this section, and occupancy would be based on the property maintenance regulations. For 638, variations, there actually are a number of subsections which reference family, and specifically looking at family necessity variations. Staff has not really seen any applications for this type of variation to our knowledge, and the process to obtain this particular type of permit is pretty cumbersome. So if it's removed, obviously it would follow that other references to it would be removed as well. And specifically in sections 638.9, 638.12, and 638.14. 6312 for the zoning administrator, we take out references to family necessity variation and type D, family occupancy. 64610, special regulations regarding accessory dwelling units. We would remove reference to occupancy by one family and instead reference compliance with standards within Title V housing regulations. And then within the appendices, anything that's listed there that follows some of the changes that are made throughout the rest of the code would also be made in this section. So these outline some of the additional process considerations. These are outlined in more detail within the staff report. We started to touch on these at the previous meeting, and these speak to obtaining the floor plans with room size requirements and applying that to both rental and owner-occupied units, updating the rental registration ordinance to require posting of the maximum occupancy form. And for this, if there is non-compliance, we would issue tickets. Rental properties would also be inspected for over-occupancy as part of a routine rental inspection or upon receipt of a complaint. Owner-occupied properties would be inspected for over-occupancy on a complaint basis. The area inspector would inspect the exteriors of the properties in the area around Northwestern University more frequently for exterior violations. Neighbors would be asked to contact the police department for loud parties, urinating in the bushes outside, etc. And the police department could issue tickets to students for their behavior and break up unruly parties as necessary. As I mentioned, update the landlord-tenant ordinance to require the names of all tenants to be on the leases. And the intent of that is so that we have all of the occupants within a space to be listed. This pretty much speaks to life safety issues and making sure that every person that is within that unit is accounted for appropriately. And if a property has more than 3 calls for service that are not related to domestic violence or 3 exterior violations or complaints in the 12-month period, the property would be declared a nuisance premise. Property standards and the police department would work with Northwestern University. As we've had some discussions already, we'd meet with students who are planning to reside off campus at the start of each term to discuss their responsibilities as neighbors and consequences for their actions. So this would basically be a good neighbor effort before any problems actually arise. So here are the regular standards for text amendments that we can go back to once we get to the deliberation aspect of the meeting. So,
Okay. Does that conclude staff presentation? Are there any
Yes.
questions of the commission? Yes. Mr. Hallett?
Yeah, I just have before we get started, I just have a procedural question here. We spent a lot of time talking about this issue, and we directed staff to pursue alternative 1, which they did. And I think, frankly, they've done a tremendous job in analyzing all the different impacts of this. My question is, I assume that we are evaluating their proposal and not going backwards. We are not going backwards.
That's correct.
Okay, that's good. That's.
I have one quick question on just something that was mentioned in here, and I can imagine I know the answer, but I want to make sure. It mentioned the 3 service calls, but it excluded domestic violence. I'm guessing that is because domestic violence is treated at a higher standard or a different standard, or why was that excluded?
yeah.
My understanding is domestic violence isn't included because you don't want to put somebody in a position of having to potentially lose their home for reporting domestic violence.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay. I think that we're ready for public comment and testimony. I know we have, at the request of Councilmember Kelly, we have a presentation by Dan Lauber. Is he on the call at this point?
Yes, he is.
All right. And again, at the request, and just for the members of the public, the Plan Commission rules typically limit testimony to 2 minutes. But in the case, again, at the request of Councilmember Kelly, Mr. Lauber, you have 10 minutes to make your presentation. So
Okay.
go ahead.
I'm going to be doing some screen sharing. I hope it's visible. My name is Daniel Lauber. I'm a former 17-year resident of Evanston. I was among the founders of the tenants organization of Evanston. I have spent an entire career as a planner and attorney devoted to achieving the goals of social equity and justice before the phrases were ever invented. But it's got to be done thoughtfully, not politically, and not speculatively. As way of background, real quickly, I've been a leader in efforts to preserve affordable housing. I've been an expert witness before both houses of Congress on preserving affordable housing. And in the analyses of impediments to fair housing choice that we've conducted, have provided paths to cities on how to reduce economic and racial segregation. I've been the author of the model zoning provisions for group homes for the American Bar Association and American Planning Association, a frequent witness for the Department of Justice in lawsuits, and have been president of the American Planning Association and twice of the American Institute of Certified Planners. I was asked to speak here because what struck me about this proposal to eliminate the definition of family is that no one's paying attention to the unintended consequences, and they are serious. If the city of Evanston were to eliminate the definition of family, it will instantly invalidate the city's provisions regarding zoning for community residences or group homes. And speaking of group homes, for people with developmental disabilities, mental illness, frail elderly, physical disabilities, sober living homes for people in recovery from substance use disorders, and small halfway houses for people with disabilities. Completely eliminate your ability to do that. It would allow rooming houses in all residential districts, even though they are not remotely similar to a community residence or typical residences. And in the packet of material that, I don't want to belabor this, in the packet of material that I posted into the chat, there is a table that shows the differences between community residences for people with disabilities, institutional uses like nursing homes and detox facilities, and rooming and boarding houses. I urge the Plan Commission to study this carefully before you move any further. Also, based on history that I've seen all over the country, group homes would concentrate in the lower cost neighborhoods in a community in Evanston. This is a map of Naperville from the analysis of impediments we did for them, and it shows 30 of the 38 group homes there concentrated right there in the center of Naperville, with several instances of 3 group homes right next to each other and instances of 2 group homes right next to each other. And the problem is, and you need to understand this, this defeats the whole purpose and ability of the group homes to achieve their essential goals of normalization and community integration and using neighbors without disabilities as role models within their, and they function in a family-like structure, family-like environment. You basically, as is explained in the packet in some detail in this 2-page document, if you don't have a definition of family, then you have to treat community residences exactly the same as any other group of unrelated people, which means they would be allowed anywhere, and the city couldn't even require a license. And it is critical that you require that these be licensed in order to protect the residents of the homes. There's a lot of sober homes out there operated by scam operators. And I encourage you to, when this is over, Google the name Kenny Chapman who is currently serving 27 and a half years in federal prison for what he did to the people in his sober homes, which included enslaving some of the residents into prostitution and keeping the people on drugs. This is a use that needs to be carefully regulated. And if you abolish the definition of family, the case law is abundantly clear. You cannot use zoning to keep them from clustering together in a neighborhood, on a block, or concentrating in a neighborhood. And you cannot use zoning to require a license. Historically, and this is consistent, every place we've looked, when you don't have regulations for zoning and requiring licensing for community residences, they will cluster, as they did in Naperville, in the lower cost housing in the community. And in Evanston, that means largely in the 2nd and 5th wards. And I've got to tell you, 2 summers ago, I was contacted by people in the 5th ward. Alderman Simmons arranged for me to do a workshop in Evanston for the community, which we were going to do till I started losing my voice after talking for 5 minutes, which may have been a godsend for anyone who listens to me, but it made it impossible to do the session. And then the pandemic arrived, and that prevented going any further. So it defeats the purpose of these homes if they start clustering. And I urge you to think carefully about this unintended consequence. It didn't even occur to staff, and I don't know why it would occur to staff, of abolishing the definition of family. There's other concerns I've got with this proposal, and I'll just stay focused on things that are in my lane. One, it will be very time-consuming and expensive to enforce the minimum floor area standards, and very intrusive. I've dealt with this all over the country. I don't know of any city that actually tries to enforce these except when new construction is built, but no one goes out and inspects unless there's a complaint. It's going to be even worse to enforce than worrying about the number of unrelated people living together. I'm also very concerned. There's been a lot of speculative assertions made in support of abolishing this definition of family, which I will give you a alternative definition at the end. And that's not right. I would like to see actual, and you should want to see, I would hope, actual examples where abolishing the definition of family has actually driven down housing costs and made more affordable housing available. I challenge anyone who's asserting that to prove it. And I'll be thrilled if they can, but I don't think they can. It's incumbent that the people making these claims provide concrete evidence of the validity of their claims. Other speculative statements that have been made is that abolishing the definition of family will maintain the appealing character of neighborhoods while guiding their change. I'm at a loss on how that's going to happen. It will maintain and enhance property values and positive perceptions of housing in Evanston. Again, where is any evidence of that? I would think it would do the opposite. It will address concerns of cost and availability. Where is the evidence? I would hope the Plan Commission would insist on seeing actual evidence, not conclusions, not speculation, but actual evidence. I don't see how abolishing the definition of family will begin to address systemic inequities that have disparate impact on lower income households. Acting to eliminate segregation in Evanston, and remember, I lived there 17 years. I know how segregated Evanston is. That would have a hell of a lot more impact on addressing systemic inequities. Instead of just abolishing the definition of family, I'd like to suggest you consider this inclusive definition of family, or you could call it household. That basically defines a family as consisting of any person living alone or any number of people related by blood, marriage, adoption, or guardianship, two unrelated individuals in a domestic relationship who have made a commitment to share their lives living as a single housekeeping unit, along with their children, including stepchildren, adopted, and guardianship, and up to 4 unrelated individuals not living in domestic partnership. This will meet most of the concerns about what are not what would be considered a conventional household 10 years ago. So unmarried couples of any gender living in a domestic relationship as a single housekeeping unit, they're in. Blended families, nuclear families, extended families, domestic partnerships. But you can't, and this is critical, much as you might want to politically, you can't include communes. Because the moment you do that, you again lose the ability to regulate group homes through your zoning. I realize with the existing zoning ordinance definition of family, there's a paragraph in there for Reba Place. If you were to use this definition, Reba Place would be grandfathered in as a legal non-conforming use. They would have no issues. It's just, I urge you, and I'm compressing an hour and a half into 10 minutes. And I apologize for having to skip so much. But I would urge you to think this out very carefully. I know you've had a lot of meetings discussing this, but from what I've read, it hasn't really been fully vetted. And evidence has not been presented to back up the assertions that have been made about this effects on affordable housing. I would also urge you to consider what historically has been happening, that when cities have done this, and they haven't had a definition of family, or they don't have a cap on the number of unrelated people, community residences locate anywhere they want, and they tend to locate in the lower income areas of a city because the housing is so much cheaper. And there are operators that are indeed scam artists. There are operators, as the Dallas Morning News pointed out, in a 3-year campaign that have been abusing, exploiting group home residents, especially people with developmental disabilities and the frail elderly. And that requires licensing to stop. And if you don't have a zoning ordinance that requires that they be licensed, you can't do anything about it. And it's all, the buck stops really at the local level. So I've skipped an awful lot. Please forgive me for having to be so quick with this. I'll be happy to answer any questions and see if I can confuse and confound you any further. And I again, thank you very much for this opportunity to address you. I got to admit, my heart's still in Evanston. I miss it terribly, but family circumstances forced us out of there. And I'm jealous of you all for still being able to live there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, we have one person who signed up in advance, so I'll go with him first. Matt Doherty. See? In the chat? All right. Do we have people signed up on your, or with their hands raised?
Yes, I signed up earlier.
All right. Ms. Baden.
Okay. So I want to know, how is rental registration different from the license for the landlord?
I think probably Sarah Flax would probably be better able to answer that, or Johanna, as they're working on that currently.
Well, it was part of your proposal, so I wanted to know what the difference was.
So this will be at a forthcoming city council meeting. However, I believe Angel Schnur is also on the Zoom call and might be able to answer some of the questions. So the idea is that this would be able to address landlords and units that that we could better regulate, removing the ability to rent those units if they're in violation of things that make the property unsafe. They're in violation of other city ordinances. It gives us an ability to stop that unit from being rented.
Yeah, but what is the procedure is the question.
We have not
Because-
established one yet. That's still, that's going to go to Planning and Development Committee on July 26th for discussion, and we will work from there.
All right, so I don't get confused. So what are we doing here tonight? Are you passing something and we don't know the full details?
This is not for landlord or rental licensing. This is for this is a text amendment. So it's in the
but this is part of the text amendment. You mentioned it here in your presentation, so I don't want you passing something and we don't even have the full understanding of what you're passing.
Sure, and that's only put there because there's been numerous discussions about other problems and concerns, and this was put in there to indicate that there's other avenues that the city will review and pursue to address some of the concerns that have been raised, and that all of the problems and the challenges that face our rental community cannot be solved with a text amendment, and that there's other opportunities for this. So the new council is very concerned about this and has directed staff to work on a number of things that are going to start to come together at the Planning and Development Committee in the coming weeks and months.
Okay, so, well, I hope that, you discuss this with the landlords that are really trying to comply. I've always been in compliance with rental registration, but I see there's lack of enforcement for rental registration on the select people that you want to skip over. So I want to know when you're making changes that you need to have some discussion with the landlords here. And also, I believe, once again, I'm going to agree with our previous speaker here about eliminating family. And it is discriminatory, which I said in my last comments at the last meeting. And we were the only family to rent in the Connections for the Homeless TBRA program to a family of 9. It was a husband and wife with 7 children. So you're just putting a blanket statement over, just rent to 8 people and put a cap on it. Well, that doesn't make sense. And when you put language in there, it just looks like you're trying to eliminate families, just what the previous speaker said, because what you're doing is creating this luxury housing. And then when you say, oh, well, you can rent to 8 people, then there's no enforcement of your own rules about affordable housing.
Ms. Payton, can you wrap it up? I think we're past your 2 minutes.
Okay, well, this looks like you're just supporting Northwestern and allowing them to rent to 8 people at a time and not going by the rules what you have in place. You're not enforcing what the rules are in place. So I don't know what all these changes are, and I reiterate my comments from the previous meeting.
Okay,
And
thank
so
you.
I have one thing to say. So is this a question, since this is a hearing, aren't you supposed to be like asking questions with an unlimited, like several questions? I'm not understanding this.
Okay, the Plan Commission recently changed its rules, so questions and testimony are handled together. So you have 2 minutes for to basically to speak. And just to clarify, the proposed text amendment really is what, that it affects or relates to whether or not the definition of family in the zoning ordinance should be removed. The Plan Commission at the last meeting opted for the alternative that removed that definition. So that's what's being considered at the moment. The alternate.
Right, and it also appears that you're saying that you can rent to 8 people regardless of the situation, and which is just supporting over occupancy by landlords that are breaking the rules and you're not enforcing currently, mostly by the Northwestern campus in the 1st and 5th Ward. So I would hope that you would not exclude family and keep 3 unrelated and enforce 3 unrelated. You've never enforced that, and that's why you're having a problem. And the last time you mentioned there's 30,000 dwelling units and 19,000 have fewer than 2 bedrooms. So that is killing a lot of families right now. And you keep on talking about affordable housing. This looks like you're just trying to push it out altogether. So I agree with the last speaker, and I will now be quiet. Thank you. Black Lives Matter.
Thank you very much. Ms.
I'm Bonnie Wilson. I would like to speak. I signed up. Can I speak now?
Sure.
First of all, hi, Dan. It's been a long time.
You haven't aged in a day.
Oh, thanks. I'm Bonnie Wilson. I've been a real estate agent in Evanston for over 35 years. And I now live in the 1st Ward and have lived in the 3rd Ward for 45 years. I have several buyers now who would like to buy a home in Evanston and share a home with 4 to 6 unrelated women. They would not be able to share a home or purchase a home now because of the 3 unrelated ordinance. This is a sign of the times when more and more individuals want to share their living expenses with others. I know of a rental agency that got an email from a tenant that would like to rent a home with other like-minded women. I fully support the city staff. The definitions for single family, 2-family, multiple family buildings will be changed to single unit, 2-unit, multiple buildings. Also, any reference to families will be updated to dwelling units, and any reference to families will be removed from zoning. As a member of the Joining Forces for Affordable Housing Committee, the new definition of dwelling units will help to have more affordable housing in Evanston. Now more three families will be able to live together in a household. I also support the over-occupancy enforcement, which would be based on the recently Property Maintenance Code square footage requirements. I want to thank Johanna, Sarah, Angelica, Megan, Melissa in working together to find a different solution to the wording of family in the Evanston ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. And who is up next?
I also signed up to speak. I don't know what happened. I didn't get a confirmation via email. But here I am.
All right.
Is this a good time?
Yes.
Right. I'm sorry I wasn't able to submit a comment for the last meeting. Personal difficulties. So I don't know if it's a little too late, but I would like to say my piece anyway, if that is okay, and I'll go as fast as I can. I do want to say to the earlier speaker that I believe a rooming house would solve the situation you were describing with 6 unrelated women wishing to live together well, but I guess that's not under consideration anymore, unfortunately. But I will go on. My name is Cecile McHugh. I've lived near Northwestern for 15 years. I'm completely opposed to the elimination of the 3-person rule in the NU area because of the potential huge, immediate, and extremely difficult to reverse negative impact. Absentee landlords purchase family homes here, modify them, charge exorbitant rents, the going rate at least $1,000 per bedroom per month, to as many students as can possibly fit in the buildings. In select but now limited areas near NU, absentee landlords, not Tina, far exceed the legal number of unrelated occupants. Some hide this, some don't bother, not having been penalized in the past. In buildings that tend to be nuisance properties. I believe that absentee landlords don't purchase properties on blocks where they anticipate pushback on the 3-person rule from neighbors. Eliminating the 3-person rule would give absentee landlords free rein in the NU area. Absentee landlords are especially interested in the many large homes here in which they can maximize profit. Recently, on one block near NU, completely owned by absentee landlords, I saw an indoor couch on a front lawn, a massive dresser on a porch, large apartment ads showing pictures of the units fixed to the front porches and/or the front of the house. On a corner elsewhere, there have been 2 porches with a large assortment of likely indoor furniture and a work table in the front yard for the past couple of years. Most all of the other blocks in this area are not at all like this, but instead extremely appealing places to live close to downtown and to the lake. It is in the interest of everyone, besides the absentee landlords, that the other blocks remain as appealing as they now are. My own block has had noise disturbances for the first time in the last 2 years, but never in the 13 years preceding. Please help us push back on these nuisances rather than make this change that will exacerbate nuisances here. Enforce the current regulations rather than change the regulations because they are not enforced. The current comprehensive plan singles out Orrington Avenue from Emerson to Central as being in need of protection from the negative effects of being near NU. An implication can be drawn that a wider area near NU is in need of protection. An update to the Evanston Comprehensive Plan, recently improved, must be completed before moving this proposed change forward. I'm almost done. I appreciated Commissioner Westerberg's comments from an earlier meeting in which she said, though it is not a popular option, an overlay district may be something to consider since areas near campus could be greatly impacted. A good part of the area near NU that would be effective is zoned R4A, and this zoning doesn't seem to be used anywhere else in the city. Have different regulations for zone R4A been considered? I feel that the 3-person rule should not be eliminated in NU without the measures listed in the packet, a rental licensing program, increases in fines, strengthening the nuisance premises ordinance, and the capacity to enforce them. A comprehensive parking and traffic study likely to recommend limits on parking permits per building. And I think I might have said this already. Yes, I did. So that's all. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you. And who is next up?
Is that a Carmen, it looks like, with a hand raised?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, I'm calling to inquire about what are you going to do about enforcing the rules for landlords, absentee landlords that have many properties in our community that are a risk property and a lot of disturbances, and nothing has been done about it. And this has been happening for over a number of years. And the police are aware of the landlords that I'm talking about. It has disrupted our community. It only takes one house in the block to disrupt the whole community. And this same landlord has been putting the same type people in the home that we're talking about. And we want to see something done about it. He has property at 14 Country Brown and other places that have been at risk. And nothing seems to be done about it. And they know who he is, and we want to know what are they going to do to enforce the noise and the problems with that type of landlord.
Okay. Thank you. And who's next?
Are they going to do anything about it?
This, I think we can defer to staff. This is a hearing solely on whether or not to eliminate the definition of family from the zoning ordinance. So the nuisance premises and the inspection and the enforcement of those are being considered by the city council, or will be considered by the city council at I believe, planning and development primarily. So that is not within the purview of the Plan Commission to consider. But staff is here, and I'm sure that will be addressed.
I'm not prepared to comment on the status of a particular property, but I've made a note of it. And if you want to send your contact information in the chat on Zoom, then I can have a staff member follow up with you.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, next we've got Rob Beisenbach.
Hi, thank you. As a member of the community in the area surrounding the university, I want to address a few points that have been made in this months-long debate, and of course, agree with Daniel Lauber about the tremendous ramifications of this proposal, of all the proposals that have been under consideration, including the one tonight. First, we all support affordable housing, but we believe a one-size-fits-all proposal will not create affordable housing in the community adjacent to the university. In fact, the going room rental rate for students in this neighborhood is $1,000 and up per bedroom and more. So we seek some type of reasonable compromise, overlay, whatever you want to call it. We also heard recently from a real estate agent who said she could not imagine people buying up $1 million or $1.5 million homes and converting them to off-campus student housing. It's already happened. It continues to happen. And it's a simple matter of math. We also heard from a landlord who testified that his properties in the area are meticulously maintained and free of nuisance complaints. And we salute him, but a simple stroll around the neighborhood reveals that he is the rare exception. We are not, of course, anti-student. Part of the appeal of moving here for many of our neighbors was the youth and energy that the students bring to the neighborhood. However, that does not mean we want block after block dominated by de facto unsupervised off-campus student housing. And finally, as so many of our neighbors here have reported all the problems they've had living next to student-filled houses run by absentee landlords, I believe their legitimate concerns have been met with a lack of empathy. In fact, last month, one commissioner put the onus on us, saying if people in the neighborhood are willing to sell to developers, they are changing the neighborhood they are living. And he also added, this is really a situation where people in the neighborhood need to have serious conversations with their neighbors about properties and who they're willing to sell to and how that will impact their neighborhood. And if I'm not mistaken, it's that approach that has got us into this affordable housing crisis, where people in a neighborhood get together and decide who they will and won't welcome into the neighborhood. So what we're asking for is some level of support in the form of reasonable, workable compromises on zoning regulations, as well as stepped up enforcement mechanisms, penalties, and other measures, particularly in the area around the university. Thank you.
Thank you. And who is up next?
Got Karen Nelson next.
Hi, thanks. I have a couple slides I wanted to show real quick to just illustrate my points. So I will do that right now. So I agree, first of all, with the attorney who spoke earlier, Mr. Lauber. I think this is something we've said a number of times, that there have been there's appears to be very little actual evidence that this type of proposal will result in affordable housing. I've taken a look at some other planning documents. One of them is from the University of Wisconsin, Department of Urban and Regional Planning. It's a 2015 document where they actually have done a pretty extensive survey of areas around campus. They noted a couple of things. Cities with established single-family homes near college and universities often face unique challenges with off-campus housing. And there are a lot of homes that, while originally were owner-occupied single-family dwellings, have been converted to rental housing. This impacts greatly the livability of the neighborhood and dramatically alters the structure and character of these areas. If left unchecked, this market phenomenon can transform a city neighborhood near colleges and universities within only a decade or two. And you don't have to look very far in our neighboring communities with universities without regulations that once lovely, beautiful homes have been transformed into, dilapidated homes. This proposed ordinance does not meet the standards of approval. It will greatly change the character of the neighborhood around Northwestern. The quality of the neighborhood will be reduced, and permanent Evanston residents will leave. In fact, even the possibility of this ordinance passing has already resulted in an Evanston family leaving the first ward. And frankly, I've talked to my neighbors, other families who are considering it. Perception of the housing in Evanston around Northwestern campus will be reduced, and it will not improve cost and affordability, and will in fact increase rental rates. Students will always be able to outspend permanent residents for rent. Let's just take an example here. This is a home that's currently for sale 2 blocks from the Northwestern campus. It's for sale for over $1 million. It's currently a 5-bedroom house. Its existing layout, however, will allow for at least 11 bedrooms. I, did a quick, drew a few lines on this layout of this particular residence, and you can fit 11 bedrooms in this home and still have plenty of common space, including a kitchen, a living room, and a downstairs rec room. If you had an ambitious landlord, they could add 2 more bedrooms and make it a 13-bedroom house, collecting. So in my example, I said 11 bedrooms. If you paid 20% down, add $25,000 for home modifications, you'll get a monthly income of $11,000. You'll make a profit of about $47,000 a year. And on your investment rate of return of a little under $250,000, it's a 19% return on your investment in a year. That is why these landlords are going to be snapping up houses left and right in this neighborhood.
Okay.
We've suggested in the past alternatives. I echo Mr. Lauber's ideas of having an expanded definition of family to be more, inclusive with the types of families that exist, rather than the nuclear traditional family as these definitions were defined in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. Add those more inclusive definitions. We absolutely would support that. But we are looking for protections against these landlords that will turn these large homes into, between 10 and 15 unit mini dorms in the neighborhood, and resulting in the flight of families from the neighborhood. Thanks.
Thank you. And who's up next?
Hi, my name is Sue Wolbach. I work at Connections for the Homeless, and we run a program called Joining Forces for Affordable Housing. I'd like to ask a question, and then I do have comment. My question has to do with the report that Mr. Lauber gave. I wanted to ask, in terms of residential care homes, is licensure actually a zoning issue? I mean, if I don't know if staff can speak to this, but I did not understand how this zoning change would make it so that we could no longer license residential care homes. It felt to me that was more a health and human service thing. Yes, it's in the city code, but it's not a zoning issue, is it?
I don't know if Mr. Lover wants to respond, but I do know for a number of the uses, such as residential care homes, there are licensing requirements that the city undertakes, and then also to some extent the state has, and certain regulations and standards for how those particular uses operate.
Okay. My understanding that it was bigger than the zoning, that there were other requirements for licensure.
Yes,
yes.
I believe there are. But that wasn't exactly the point. Was that if you don't have a definition of family, the licensing and the limitations wouldn't apply. But we can get,
Okay. Yeah,
anyway,
okay.
why don't you go ahead with your comment?
Okay, I'll go ahead with my comment. At Joining Forces, we are very impressed with the proposals that staff came up with and very much support them. We have gone into some detail in prior meetings about why we support the repeal of this 3 unrelated rule and the definition of family. One thing I would like to clarify is that we have never, ever said that repeal of this ordinance would drive down the cost of housing. We have never said that it would create more affordable housing. What we have said is that it would allow people to spend less on their housing by virtue of sharing that cost and splitting it up. And as Bonnie Wilson mentioned earlier, and as we've mentioned with Connections for the Homeless, we do know of situations where people want and need to do that in order to afford housing here. I'd also like to just stress that the current ordinance appears not to be working right now. It feels to me like all the fears that people who live around Northwestern have are actually coming true with the current ordinance in place. And I would really like to see the city consider the proposals by staff as being an alternative way of trying to actually do something about these problems. I would say that what staff is proposing by itself is not going to be enough, because until there are enough apartment buildings in places away from these single-family home neighborhoods, there is going to continue to be this tension. But since the current solution is not working, we really, really support trying a new solution. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And did Mr. Lauber want to respond to the question, if you're on the call?
Sure, thank you. The way the case law has worked out, one, it is perfectly legal and rational for zoning ordinances to require data community residents or group home or sober home be licensed as part of the police power to protect the residents of the home from abuse, exploitation, etc. And it is quite common around the country, and DOJ, Department of Justice, and I have no problem with it for zoning ordinances require that a community residents have a license or certification. It's particularly critical with the sober homes that I'm dealing with so much all over the country, especially in Arizona and Florida and in Illinois. The idea, I would encourage you, I posted on the chat, I don't know if it's accessible to everybody, and if the organizers of this meeting can make it accessible to everybody, the packet of material that I had submitted to the Plan Commission and used in my presentation includes a 2-page explanation of the state of the law regarding zoning for group homes. And it explains the maximum that you can do. You can overdo it. And I'll be candid, Evanston's current zoning, I think, runs afoul of the Fair Housing Act. It's sort of based on zoning that I wrote back in 1974, which I would characterize as zoning for group homes, beta version 0.5, and now we're on version 20. Much more sophisticated and much more fair and more in compliance with the Fair Housing Act. So otherwise, you can visit grouphomes.law, and you can download the 2-page summary of the state of the art on zoning law. And I should add, just so you know, I lived at 200 South Boulevard for 4 or 5 of the years of my 17 years in Evanston, and guided the North Shore Association through the zoning process to build a group home for 12 adults with developmental disabilities right next door to our condo. And it's been a good neighbor, but you wouldn't want another one right next door or 2 or 3 doors down, because that does start to change the character of the neighborhood, especially if it's serving the same population and undermines the ability of the homes to achieve community integration and use of neighbors as role models, because people from the homes will just interact with each other and not with the neighbors in the neighborhood. So it undermines the whole underlying purpose why the courts have said group homes need to be allowed in residential areas. I'm a great believer in following the advice of Vincini in The Princess Bride. When you're lost, always go back to the beginning. So I always go back to the reasons why the courts have been ruling the way they have.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And to note, the documents that Mr. Lauber submitted for the Plan Commission, those have been posted to the Plan Commission page. They're under additional comments under the packet for this meeting.
Okay, thank you. And who is our next speaker?
It looks like that is it. No one else is raising their hand.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, I will close the public testimony, and now it's time for commission deliberations. Mr. Halleck.
I'd just like to make one comment, and this is not meant to criticize any of the citizens who've spoken, but I sense, and I could be wrong about this, but I sense that several of them have not read the report that the staff put together, because in my opinion, if they had, a lot of their concerns would be alleviated. Because I think again, the staff did a great job in putting this report together, and it's very comprehensive.
Okay. All right. So what is the pleasure of the commissioners with respect to the proposed text amendment?
I want to make just a couple of comments. I also commend the staff. I know all of the time and effort that has gone into this, especially over a several-month period, and I'm sure time leading up to that. I think my question continues to go to, how will the city really know that once these changes are made, that the changes are effective in increasing housing options for people? We understand this won't necessarily increase affordable housing, but how will you really be able to evaluate that? So my concern is that what I'm not seeing in the memo and the report is some kind of evaluative approach that the city can say to citizens, here are the improvements, this is why we know it's working, and this is why it has made sense to do that. My other question is related to resources, and I know you mentioned in the memo that you see hiring one additional inspector. But, you know, when we hear about the number of nuisance properties that do exist, the time it takes to take those nuisance properties through a process before you can really do something legally, I guess I would encourage the staff to really think about whether that's even near enough. You also have interactions with the police that the neighbors will have, and collecting all of that data, understanding what that data means, and actually going after properties that have proven to be a problem. It seems to me that you're going to need more resources than that. So if we are going to contemplate a change that really takes the language away, clearly enforcement is an issue, and I think added resources and some kind of an evaluation program would be helpful in knowing how all of this is going to work. I don't know much about group homes, but I am concerned about what I heard tonight, but I'm sure that's something that the city can look at and address in terms of licensing. But there are some issues here. And obviously there are 2 wards that are going to bear the brunt of this. Again, it may not be a problem for the rest of the wards in the city, but I do think extra resources need to be directed to those 2 wards. And those would be my comments.
Commissioner Rogers?
I'll go ahead and speak next. Again, I also want to commend staff. I was not expecting to see something back this quickly, so thank you for responding as quickly as you did. I think in terms of enforcement, you know, we're not seeing enforcement of rules now. And I think by strengthening enforcement and beginning the enforcement on some of these nuisances, which are really the problems that we're hearing, as I've mentioned before, I can be one person and be quite a nuisance in my neighborhood, and there can be 20 people who can be not a nuisance in their neighborhood. And so the number of people is not something that concerns me. It's the impact on the neighborhood that concerns me. And I have the feeling that once we begin cracking down on those nuisances, you're going to see a number of landlords who will come into line with that. Because of the fact that once a couple of them get taken to court or have issues with licensure or rental revocation or something like that, revocation or something like that, I think you're going to see people beginning to say, oh, the city is starting to take this seriously, and that they will begin to fall in line with the rules. And like I said, the issue for me is not the number of people, it's the impact on the neighborhood. So I think I've made my position made clear through various other meetings, so I will not belabor those points again. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? All right. Does anyone want to make a motion as to how to proceed with respect to the text amendment?
Sure. I would like to, again, maybe there could be tweaks to the report, and obviously enforcement is key, absolutely, and maybe there should be more staff. But I think with those comments, I'd like to approve the text amendment as presented by staff and send it to City Council.
I will second it.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion? I guess I didn't really speak, but I will make my position before we vote. I think that I think that eliminating the definition of family is a bad idea, first of all, but I also think it's premature for the council to consider adopting this amendment before they make other decisions. For example, implementation of this proposed text amendment requires that the city fund at least one additional inspector just to calculate the maximum occupancy. And before the city council, if the city council chooses not to provide those resources, then there's no real enforcement mechanism at all. And I find that problematic. There also are the related issues, the nuisance prevention ordinance, the landlord licensing discussions, and a number of other related issues that while they don't specifically speak to the zoning ordinance and the text amendment, I think it is premature to recommend approval of this. But again, the discussion needs to go to the city council so that they can.
I'm not sure whose responsibility it is to work out those details, though. I don't think it's ours.
No, it's not us, and it is the city council. But without the overall strategy, I can't support the proposed text amendment as it's written. So I'll be voting no for primarily that reason. But again, I've made my position and my concerns obvious and explained and discussed those at prior meetings. So I think that the record is there for the city council to address as they see fit. So I think, yes, Mr. Cuco.
If I could just add to that, I do support the text amendment, but I also do very much hope that the city council, when it takes up this text amendment, in conjunction with that, will approve a rental licensing program and the increase in fines, et cetera, because I think that the issue here is enforcement. It is beefing up the penalties. And so I very much hope that all this happens as a package so that some of the negative consequences that have been raised can be ameliorated as much as possible.
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay, then it's been moved and seconded. Will you call the roll? Oh, the standards, I'm sorry. We do have to go through the standards. So if someone would pull up the standards? All right, the first standard is whether the proposed amendment is consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the Comprehensive General Plan as adopted and amended from time to time by the City Council. I mean, that's one of the things that I find problematic, but I imagine there are others on the commission that feel differently.
I think the goals of the comprehensive plan are very general, and I think I would say this is consistent with those goals, if we read those goals.
Well, I mean, I think I'm looking at, the preserving neighborhood character, and I don't think it necessarily does that. And again, we'll have a debate on that.
I think some of us would disagree.
Yes, I expect that is the case. So I think we have a mixed vote on that. The second one is whether the proposed amendment is compatible with the overall character of existing development in the immediate vicinity of the subject property. That's not applicable. This is a text amendment. Whether the proposed amendment will have an adverse effect on the value of adjacent properties. Again, this is a citywide text amendment, so I don't believe that would be applicable. And then finally, the adequacy of public facilities and services. Again, I don't believe that is applicable because we're not changing. It's a definition we're addressing. All right. Does that satisfy what we need to do?
Yes, that does. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Okay, so.
Okay, it's been first and seconded. So I'll call the roll. Commissioner Draper?
No.
Commissioner Halleck?
Yes.
Commissioner Hugo?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson?
He left.
Oh. Yeah. Commissioner Rogers?
Yes.
Commissioner Westerberg?
No.
And Chair Linwall?
No.
So that is a split vote. 3-3.
All right. So that concludes the new business. I'm presuming we don't have any public comment at this point?
I don't believe so.
All right. Do you have anything to add, or are we ready to adjourn?
I think just in general, we will be having a meeting on the 28th and on August 11th. And actually, I think at the end of the packet, I could have included a little bit of information on initiative to realign the Zoning Board of Appeals and Plan Commission, essentially to combine the two. So that is in the works. That's at still pretty much the beginning stages, but that is in the works.
All right. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.